Hey everyone, and welcome. Think of this as our fun little study group for PP 5361, Theory and Management of Public Service Organizations. Today, we're diving into the required text, Managing Human Behavior in Public and Nonprofit Organizations, and we're tackling Chapter 6, Motivation and Engagement. All right, let's jump right in.
So right out of the gate, let's just get this big, kind of uncomfortable question out on the table. There's this stereotype that's been around forever, and our reading for this week wants us to really face it. Are people who go into public service just less driven? Is there any truth to that? Let's investigate.
So to figure out what's real, we've got to understand the myth itself. Where does this idea even come from? In this first section, we're going to unpack the common assumptions that have been fueling this stereotype about public sector workers for years.
Okay, so here's the logic behind the myth, right? The thinking goes something like this. Since managers in the public sector can't just hand out big bonuses or promotions whenever they want, and because the goals can sometimes feel a little fuzzy, well then the people who choose to work there must not be very ambitious to begin with. The assumption is they're really just there for the job security.
Well, turns out that's just not true. The textbook is super clear on this. Years and years of research show that public and nonprofit employees are not less motivated than folks in the private sector. Here's the crucial part, though. They are often differently motivated, and that difference, that's everything.
So, if it's not about being lazy, what is it really about? This brings us to our next section. The best way to think about these classic motivation theories is like a practical toolkit. It's for any manager who's trying to figure out what actually makes people tick. You'll see how each one of these tools gives us another piece of the puzzle.
First up in our toolkit, we've got the foundation, Maslow's hierarchy. You've probably seen this pyramid before. The basic idea is that we're what Maslow called perpetually wanting animals. We start at the bottom with basic needs for survival and safety, but once those are covered, we don't just stop. We're always looking up the pyramid, searching for belonging, for self-esteem, and eventually self-actualization, that drive to become the best version of ourselves. This tells us what people want.
Okay, so building on that idea that people are striving for something more, Douglas McGregor came along and asked a pretty radical question. What if we as managers just assumed people wanted to do good work? This slide shows his two competing worldviews. Theory X is that old-school, cynical take. People are lazy, they hate work, and you gotta force them to do it. But Theory Y? It flips the whole script. It assumes that work is natural, that people want responsibility, and that they'll do amazing things if you just create the right environment. It shifts our thinking from what people want to how we should see them. And Hertzberg's theory here is brilliant, because it adds a really subtle but vital layer to this. He said that getting rid of the stuff that makes people unhappy, like, bad pay or a crummy office, that doesn't automatically make them motivated. He called those hygiene factors. They just prevent dissatisfaction. True motivation, the kind that gets people excited to come to work, that comes from the work itself. The challenge, the recognition, the responsibility is the huge difference between being not unhappy and being genuinely fired up.
So let's round out the toolkit with these last three. They're called cognitive theories because they're all based on a simple idea. People think. We're rational. We're constantly doing a cost-benefit analysis in our heads about whether our effort is going to pay off. That's expectancy theory. We work harder when we have a clear, challenging target, not just a vague, do your best. That's goal-setting theory. And, maybe most importantly, we are deeply affected by whether we think we're being treated fairly compared to everyone else. And that's equity theory. Okay, so we've got our general toolkit for understanding motivation. But now we get to the heart of it. For anyone working in the public and nonprofit sectors, there's a special, powerful motivator that completely changes the game.
And here it is. It's called Public Service Motivation, or PSM. This is the core idea that explains so much. It's the theory that people are drawn to this kind of work for reasons that go way beyond a paycheck. It's an internal, pre-existing desire to serve and to make a real difference in the world.
Now, PSM isn't just one simple thing. The chapter breaks it down into these three flavors. For some people, it's rational. It's a head thing. They see a program's goals and think, yes, I identify with that. For others, it's norm-based, a deep sense of civic duty, of what's right. And for many, it's affective. It's a heart thing, a powerful, emotional, gut-level connection to the mission.
This quote from the text just hits the nail on the head. This is the big takeaway for managers. It's not enough to tell people what to do and how to do it. The most powerful tool you have in your entire toolkit is connecting their day-to-day tasks to the bigger mission. The why is absolutely everything.
So if we know that purpose is the fuel, how do you build the right kind of engine? We need to look beyond just the theories of motivation and talk about how you create an actual environment of engagement and trust at work.
Now just take a look at that number. According to Gallup studies that are cited in our reading, only 28% of employees in the U.S. are actively engaged at work. Let that sink in for a second. More than 70% of people are just checked out. This isn't a small issue. It's a huge economy-wide crisis of disengagement.
So, the key idea here is that this massive disengagement problem is really a symptom of meaninglessness. And here's the kicker from the research. While it's hard for a manager to magically create meaning for someone, it is incredibly easy for a manager to destroy it. Simple, everyday actions like taking people for granted, giving them pointless busy work, or treating them unfairly. Those things can absolutely crush the motivation people walked in the door with.
All right, let's bring it all home. Let's take all this theory and turn it into something you can actually use as a manager, either now or in the future. This last section is your practical, actionable checklist, pulled right from the chapter's conclusions.
First things first, it starts with you. You have to look in the mirror. You simply cannot light a fire in other people if your own spark has gone out. Your energy, your own engagement, your own motivation, that sets the tone for your entire team. Second, you have to resist the temptation to think everyone is just like you. What gets you fired up in the morning might be totally different from what drives your team members. There is no one-size-fits-all strategy. You have to talk to people. You have to listen. You have to actually learn what they need as individuals.
Third, remember goal-setting theory. People need clear, challenging goals. But here's the trick. Don't just hand goals down from on high. When you set those goals with your employees, you get their buy-in, you build commitment, and you create a shared picture of what success even looks like.
Fourth, make that expectancy theory connection crystal clear. People have to see the line that connects their effort to their performance to some kind of reward. And remember, a reward is not just money. For many people, public recognition, a new opportunity, or even just a sincere thank you can be way more powerful.
And finally, never, ever underestimate the raw power of fairness. People are constantly looking around, comparing their situation to others. Even if the outcomes aren't exactly the same for everyone, the process and the results have to be seen as equitable. A sense of unfairness is maybe the fastest way to kill motivation dead.
So let's end with this one final thought. After all these theories, the big takeaway from Chapter 6 is really a shift in mindset. A manager's job isn't to be a motivator who's constantly pushing people from behind. It's to be an enabler who creates a space where people's own internal drive can pull them forward. So the question to leave you with is this: what's getting in their way, and what can you do to clear the path?